The seeds of doubt. The morning sun had barely touched the red earth of their village when Amara first heard the whispers. She was only 10 years old, standing in line with other girls her age for the annual Harvest Festival dance performance, when the dance instructor's words cut through the air like a knife. Amara, you'll need to stand in the back row. We want the audience to see our prettiest dancers up front. The other girls giggled, and Amara felt her heart sink. She knew what the instructor really meant. Her deep ebony skin didn't fit the instructor's idea of beauty. It wasn't the first time she'd heard such words, and it wouldn't be the last. In their small Nigerian village of Ife Gardens, beauty standards were as deeply rooted as the ancient Iroko trees that lined the main road. Light skin was prized, celebrated, and rewarded. Dark skin, no matter how rich and beautiful, was often viewed as a burden to bear. Amara's family lived in a modest compound near the village center, where her father worked as a respected university professor and her mother ran a successful fabric shop. They were neither rich nor poor, but they had earned their place in the community through hard work and dedication. Yet even within these walls, Amara couldn't escape the constant reminders of how her appearance affected her worth in others' eyes. Her mother, Grace, was a woman of medium complexion who had inherited her father's lighter tone. She would often sigh when looking at Amara, as if her daughter's dark skin was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "You must have gotten it from your great-grandmother's side," she would say, shaking her head. "Such a shame, you have such lovely features otherwise." Amara's younger brother, Chidi, had taken after their mother, his skin the color of honey. He received countless compliments from relatives and neighbors, while Amara stood by, invisible. The contrast in how they were treated was subtle but persistent, like a quiet drum beating in the background of their lives. At school, Amara excelled in her studies, particularly in literature and mathematics. Her mind was sharp, her imagination vivid, and her work ethic unmatched. Yet her academic achievements were often overshadowed by comments about her appearance. When she won the state mathematics competition, her teacher's praise came with a sting. Who would have thought someone like you could be so clever? The seeds of doubt planted themselves deeper with each passing day. Amara began to notice how the local television shows only featured light-skinned presenters. How the beauty shops in the nearby city displayed posters of fair-skinned models. How even the dolls her parents bought for her had pale plastic skin that looked nothing like her own. Despite these challenges, Amara found solace in her grandfather, Papa Joseph. Unlike the others, he saw her beauty clearly and celebrated it. Every evening, as they sat on the veranda watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, he would tell her stories of their ancestors, proud, dark-skinned warriors and queens who had ruled kingdoms and shaped history. "Your skin, my child," he would say, his wise eyes twinkling, "is like the midnight sky that holds all the stars of the universe. It is a crown passed down through generations." These moments with Papa Joseph were like cool water in the desert of her self-doubt, but they couldn't completely wash away the impact of society's constant judgment. As Amara approached her teenage years, she began to notice changes in how people treated her when she ventured beyond their village. In the city markets, vendors would call out to lighter-skinned girls first, leaving her waiting. At social gatherings, she watched as boys asked her lighter-skinned classmates to dance while she sat alone. The turning point came during her 13th birthday celebration. Her mother had organized a small party, inviting family and close friends. As everyone gathered to sing and share cake, Amara overheard two aunties speaking in hushed tones. "Poor Grace," one said, stirring her tea. "How will she ever find a good match for that girl? These days, no one wants to marry someone so dark." "Perhaps she should start saving for skin lightening creams," the other replied. "I know a woman in Lagos who sells very effective ones." The words settled like heavy stones in Amara's stomach. That night, after the guests had gone and the house had grown quiet, she stood before her mirror, really looking at herself. Her reflection showed a tall, graceful girl with high cheekbones, bright eyes, and skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. For the first time, she began to wonder if they were right, if changing her skin was the only way to find acceptance in a world that seemed determined to reject her. But Papa Joseph's words echoed in her mind, your skin is your crown. She touched her face, feeling the smooth, cool surface beneath her fingertips. Was it possible that both could be true? That her skin could be both a crown and a curse in this complex world they lived in? As she lay in bed that night, listening to the chorus of crickets outside her window, Amara made a decision. She would prove them all wrong. She would show them that beauty came in all shades, that success wasn't limited by the color of one's skin. But even as she made this vow to herself, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. Would strength of will be enough in a world so set in its ways? The seeds of doubt had been planted deep, and as Amara drifted off to sleep, she couldn't know how these seeds would grow and transform her life in the years to come. The path ahead would test not just her resolve, but her very understanding of beauty, worth, and the price some pay in pursuit of acceptance. Shadows in the mirror. 5 years had passed since Amara's 13th birthday, and the seeds of doubt had grown into towering trees that cast long shadows over her life. Now 18, she stood before the mirror in her small bedroom, preparing for her final secondary school examination. Her reflection showed a young woman whose beauty had blossomed despite society's attempts to convince her otherwise, but whose eyes carried a weight beyond her years. The morning light filtering through her window caught the collection of achievement certificates pinned to her wall: academic excellence, debate team victories, creative writing awards. Yet these papers, impressive as they were, felt like hollow victories in a world that seemed to value appearance above all else. That morning, as she adjusted her school uniform, her mother burst into the room, clutching a glossy magazine. "Amara! Look at this." Grace's eyes sparkled with excitement as she thrust the magazine toward her daughter. "Your cousin Chioma, she's done it. She's become the face of Golden Radiance beauty products." The magazine showed Chioma's beaming face, her once dark skin now several shades lighter, practically glowing against the studio backdrop. The headline read, "From Village Girl to Beauty Queen, the transformation story that's taking Nigeria by storm." "She looks so beautiful," Grace gushed, running her fingers over the glossy page. "And to think, she was even darker than you just 2 years ago. Her mother told me about this new cream from Dubai." Her voice trailed off meaningfully. Amara's stomach churned as she studied the image. Chioma did look beautiful, but something about her smile seemed strained, artificial. The photo had been heavily edited, making her skin appear almost luminescent. Was this really what success looked like? Later that day, during lunch break at school, Amara sat with her best friend Zainab under their usual mango tree. Zainab, whose family had moved from the northern region, was one of the few people who never made Amara feel less than beautiful. "Did you see Chioma's advertisement?" Zainab asked, sharing her jollof rice with Amara. "Mama brought the magazine this morning," Amara replied, picking at her food. She couldn't stop talking about how transformed Chioma looks. Zainab set down her spoon, her expression serious. "You know, my sister started using those creams last year. Now she can't stop. Her skin burns in the sun, and sometimes it peels so badly she can't leave the house. But she says she can't stop because her skin will look worse than before if she does." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Amara thought about the growing number of girls in their school who had started bleaching their skin. How their complexions changed gradually, week by week, like flowers losing their natural color under harsh chemicals. That evening, Amara visited Papa Joseph, seeking the wisdom and comfort she always found in his presence. She found him in his small garden, tending to his prized roses. Despite his advancing age, he still maintained the garden with the same care and attention he had shown throughout her childhood. "Papa," she began, settling onto the wooden bench beside his flower beds, "did you see Chioma's advertisement?" He looked up from his roses, his aged face creasing with concern. "Ah, yes. Another young flower, trying to change her natural color. Tell me, Amara, have you ever seen me trying to make these red roses turn white?" "No, Papa. And why would I? Each flower blooms as nature intended, perfect in its own way." He gestured to the variety of flowers in his garden, roses in deep red and pale pink, purple hibiscus, yellow marigolds. "Beauty is not about being one color or another. It's about being true to what you are. But even as Papa Joseph's words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, Amara couldn't ignore the reality of the world beyond his garden. That evening, she spent hours scrolling through social media, seeing post after post celebrating light-skinned beauty. Every advertisement, every celebrity photo, every viral transformation story seemed to reinforce the same message: lighter was better. In the privacy of her room, Amara began to experiment with filters on her phone, adjusting the lighting and color of her selfies until her skin appeared several shades lighter. The altered images garnered more likes, more compliments, more attention than her natural photos ever did. Each notification felt like a small betrayal of Papa Joseph's wisdom, yet she couldn't deny the allure of acceptance. The breaking point came during her school's graduation ceremony. As class valedictorian, Amara was asked to give a speech. She had spent weeks preparing, pouring her heart into words that would inspire her fellow graduates. But as she stood at the podium, she overheard two teachers whispering. Such a shame about her complexion. She could have been the complete package. Yes, with her intelligence and that figure, if only she were lighter. Their words followed her home that evening, echoing in her mind as she stood before her mirror once again. The shadows in the glass seemed darker now, more demanding. Her reflection stared back at her, asking questions she wasn't sure she could answer. Was academic success enough in a world that judged so harshly based on appearance? Could she achieve her dreams while remaining true to herself? The magazine featuring Chioma lay open on her desk, its pages reflecting the warm light of her bedside lamp. The transformed image of her cousin seemed to mock her, offering an easy solution to a complex problem. That night, Amara made a list in her journal, something she did whenever she needed to make sense of her thoughts. On one side, she wrote reasons to stay natural, and on the other, reasons to change. As she wrote, tears splashed onto the page, smudging the ink, but she continued writing until both columns were full. The list revealed more than just pros and cons, it revealed the war raging within her. A war between the wisdom of Papa Joseph and the pressures of society, between her desire for acceptance and her need for authenticity, between the girl she was and the woman she wanted to become. As she finally drifted off to sleep, the shadows in her mirror seemed to whisper that soon she would have to make a choice. The path ahead would require more than just physical transformation, it would demand a price that went far deeper than skin. A different path. The opportunity came disguised as fate, arriving in the form of a crumpled flyer that blew against Amara's feet one dusty afternoon. She had been walking home from her part-time job at the local library, her mind heavy with the weight of recent events. The paper caught her attention with its bold headline, Golden Horizons Entertainment, Nationwide Talent Search. Amara picked up the flyer, smoothing its wrinkled surface. The entertainment company was looking for fresh faces for their upcoming television projects. The auditions would be held in Lagos, just a few hours away by bus. What caught her eye wasn't just the opportunity itself, but the words at the bottom, all shapes, sizes, and complexions welcome. She almost laughed at that last part. How many times had she heard similar promises, only to face rejection? Yet something about this felt different. Perhaps it was the timing, coming just weeks after her graduation, when she stood at the crossroads of her future. Or perhaps it was desperation, the need to prove herself in a world that seemed determined to diminish her worth. That evening, during dinner, Amara gathered her courage to share her plans with her family. The reaction was exactly as she'd expected. Television? Her mother scoffed, setting down her spoon. Amara, be serious. With your grades, you could study medicine or law. Why waste time on such foolishness? Her father, usually buried in his academic papers, looked up with concern. The entertainment industry is no place for a respectable young woman. Besides, he added, his voice softening slightly, you know how these things work. They always choose the same type of girls. Only Chitty, her younger brother, showed any enthusiasm. I think you should try, he said, earning a sharp look from their mother. You're always acting out stories for the kids at church. You're good at it. Later that night, Amara sat cross-legged on her bed, video calling her friend Zainab, who had moved to Lagos for university earlier that year. "You can stay with me," Zainab offered without hesitation. "The audition is next weekend, right? Come on Friday, and we'll figure out everything together." The next week passed in a blur of secret preparations. Amara told her parents she was visiting Zainab to help her prepare for university exams. It wasn't entirely a lie, she did plan to visit Zainab. She just omitted the part about the audition. The morning of her departure, Papa Joseph called her to his garden. As she sat beside him on the wooden bench, surrounded by the sweet scent of flowers, he pressed something into her hand, a small, carved wooden pendant on a leather cord. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," he said softly. "She was an oral historian, a keeper of our people's stories. She believed that every person's life is a story waiting to be told." His eyes twinkled. "Perhaps it's time for you to tell yours." Amara's throat tightened as she fastened the pendant around her neck. Sometimes she wondered if Papa Joseph could read minds, or if he simply knew her heart better than she knew it herself. The journey to Lagos was a 5-hour lesson in anxiety. As the bus wound through increasingly urban landscapes, Amara's mind raced with doubts. Was she making a huge mistake? Should she just return home and accept the path her parents had chosen for her? Zainab was waiting at the bus station, her bright smile a beacon in the chaos of the city. They hugged tightly, and for a moment, Amara felt her fears subside. That evening, in Zainab's tiny student apartment, they talked for hours about everything and nothing, just like they used to do under the mango tree at school. The morning of the audition dawned hot and humid. Amara stood in line outside the Golden Horizons building, clutching her registration number. Around her, hundreds of other hopefuls waited, some in elaborate makeup and fancy clothes, others in simple attire like herself. As the line inched forward, Amara observed her competition. Many had clearly used skin-lightening products, their complexions artificially pale against the bright sunlight. Some wore colored contact lenses, their natural brown eyes replaced with blues and greens. The sight made her unconsciously touch Papa Joseph's pendant, drawing strength from its smooth wooden surface. When her turn finally came, Amara entered a large room where 3 judges sat behind a table. The center judge, a woman with elegant gray twists in her hair, looked up from her papers. "Registration number 247, she read. "Amara Okafor. Tell us why you're here." Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the pendant against her chest. In that moment, she made a decision that would alter the course of her life. Instead of performing a prepared monologue or song like the other contestants, she began to tell a story. It was her great-grandmother's story, passed down through Papa Joseph, the tale of a woman who kept her people's history alive through words and wisdom. As Amara spoke, her voice grew stronger, her gestures more confident. She wove the ancient story with threads of her own experience, creating something entirely new yet timelessly familiar. When she finished, the room was silent. The woman with gray twists leaned forward, her eyes intense. "That was unexpected," she said slowly. "Who wrote that piece?" "No one wrote it," Amara replied, her heart pounding. "It's an oral history, passed down through my family. I just added my own truth to it." The judge exchanged glances with her colleagues, before turning back to Amara. "Do you have any idea what we're actually casting for?" "The flyer didn't specify," Amara admitted. "I just knew I had to try." A smile touched the judge's lips. "We're launching a new television series about modern African women reclaiming their heritage. It's called Daughters of the Soil. We've been looking for someone who can bring authenticity to the role of a young griot, a storyteller." She paused meaningfully. "Someone exactly like you." As Amara left the building that afternoon, clutching a callback card for the next round of auditions, she felt as though she was walking on air. She had come expecting rejection, prepared to face the same prejudices she'd encountered all her life. Instead, she had found something she never expected, a chance to be valued not despite her appearance, but because of who she was completely. That evening, as she and Zainab celebrated with cold chapman and spicy suya, Amara's phone buzzed with a message from her brother. Chitty had covered for her absence at home, but their mother was asking questions. Soon, she would have to face her family with the truth of her choices. But for now, sitting on Zainab's tiny balcony watching the Lego sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold, Amara felt at peace. She had chosen a different path, one that might not lead to immediate acceptance or easy success, but one that felt true to herself. The wooden pendant rested warm against her skin, carrying the weight of generations of storytellers. Perhaps, Amara thought, it was time for a new kind of story, one that would challenge not just her own doubts, but the very notions of beauty and worth that had shaped her world for so long. The Rising Star. The callback card from Golden Horizons Entertainment turned into more than just an audition, it became Amara's ticket to a new life. After 3 rounds of intense auditions, screen tests, and script readings, she landed the lead role in Daughters of the Soil. But with this achievement came the moment she'd been dreading, telling her family. She chose a Sunday afternoon to break the news, after church, when everyone would be home. The living room fan whirred overhead as she stood before her parents, hands clasped tightly behind her back. "I've been cast in a television series," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's a leading role. They want me to start filming next month." The silence that followed was deafening. Her mother's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disappointment, anger. Her father removed his glasses, cleaning them methodically as he always did when stressed. "Absolutely not," Grace finally declared. "No daughter of mine will be prancing around on television. What will people say?" But before Amara could respond, Papa Joseph spoke from his corner of the room. "They will say that my great-granddaughter is sharing our stories with the world." He rose slowly from his chair, his presence commanding attention. "Just as her namesake, my mother, once did." The discussion raged for hours. Voices rose and fell, tears were shed, and old wounds were reopened. But in the end, it was Papa Joseph's influence that swayed the tide. He reminded them of their own dreams, of the importance of letting the younger generation find their own path. Besides, he added with a knowing smile, the contract they're offering pays more than a first-year doctor's salary. That practical detail finally silenced her mother's strongest objections. Within weeks, Amara found herself moving to Lagos, sharing an apartment with Zainab in a modest but safe neighborhood close to the studio. The first day of filming was a revelation. The production set buzzed with energy, cameras, lights, people rushing about with clipboards and headsets. The woman with gray twists, whom Amara now knew as director Adana Okoro, took her under her wing. "You have something special," Director Okoro told her during their first rehearsal. "You're not just reciting lines, you're telling our stories. That's what this show is about." Daughters of the Soil was indeed different from typical Nigerian television fare. It followed the lives of 3 young women reconnecting with their cultural heritage in modern Lagos. Amara's character, Olayinka, was a griot's apprentice learning to bridge the gap between ancient traditions and contemporary life. The show's authenticity extended to its production values. Director Okoro insisted on natural lighting that complemented various skin tones, and the makeup artists were trained to work with all complexions. For the first time in her life, Amara's deep ebony skin was celebrated rather than hidden. But success rarely comes without challenges. As episodes began airing, social media exploded with mixed reactions. Many praised the show's fresh perspective and Amara's powerful performance. Others were less kind. Why did they choose someone so dark for the lead? Great show, but they should have picked a prettier actress. Who wants to watch this charcoal on screen? The comments stung, but Amara found strength in unexpected places. Fan letters began pouring in from young girls who saw themselves represented on screen for the first time. Mothers wrote about their daughters finally embracing their natural beauty. The show's ratings climbed steadily. One particular fan letter touched her deeply. It came from a 12-year-old girl in Kaduna. "Dear Amara, I used to hate my dark skin. The kids at school call me names. But when I saw you on TV, so beautiful and strong, telling our stories, I felt proud for the first time. Now I want to be a storyteller too. Thank you for showing me it's possible. Aisha. The letter brought tears to Amara's eyes. She kept it pinned above her dressing table, a reminder of why her journey mattered. As the show's popularity grew, so did Amara's visibility. Magazine covers came calling, not just entertainment weeklies, but major publications. Unlike her cousin Chioma's glamour shots, these photos celebrated Amara's natural beauty. One memorable cover featured her in traditional attire, her skin glowing like polished obsidian, Papa Joseph's pendant prominent against her collarbone. But with visibility came pressure. At industry events, she noticed how she stood out among the lighter-skinned actresses. Producers would praise her work, then subtly suggest she'd get even more roles if she enhanced her look. Some makeup artists still tried to use lighter foundation on her, claiming it would photograph better. The most difficult moment came during a prestigious awards ceremony. Amara had been nominated for Best New Actress, and Daughters of the Soil was up for several awards. As she walked the red carpet in a stunning gown inspired by traditional Yoruba design, she overheard a veteran actress speaking to a reporter. "Of course, she's talented," the actress said, not realizing Amara was within earshot, "but this whole natural beauty thing is just a trend. She'll learn eventually." We all did. That night, despite winning the award, Amara lay awake in her apartment, thinking about those words. The veteran actress had once been famous for her dark skin, but recent photos showed her several shades lighter. Was that really the inevitable path? Would the industry's pressures eventually wear down even the strongest convictions? Her phone buzzed with a message from Papa Joseph. "Remember, my child, the strongest trees have the deepest roots." As she finally drifted off to sleep, the awards trophy gleaming on her bedside table, Amara couldn't know that her biggest challenges and choices still lay ahead. Her rising star was about to enter a new orbit, one that would test not just her resolve, but everything she believed about beauty, success, and the price of dreams. Glittering lights. Success, Amara discovered, was a double-edged sword that cut both ways. As Daughters of the Soil wrapped its first season with record-breaking ratings, her life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The small apartment she shared with Zainab was now cluttered with scripts, designer clothes sent by fashion houses eager to dress her, and invitations to every major event in Lagos. The most surprising change came in how people treated her. The same complexion that had once drawn whispers and mockery now became her trademark. Fashion magazines dubbed her the Obsidian Queen and Nigeria's natural beauty. Cosmetic companies that had never featured dark-skinned models suddenly wanted her as their brand ambassador. One morning, as Amara sat in her favorite cafe trying to read a new script, a group of teenage girls approached her table, giggling nervously. "Can we take a selfie with you?" one asked, phone already raised. "We started a fan club for you at our school. We call ourselves the Natural Queens." Amara smiled, remembering her own teenage years, how desperately she had wished for someone like herself to look up to. As she posed with the girls, she noticed something remarkable. None of them wore the heavy makeup or used the skin-lightening creams that had been so common in her school days. But not everyone celebrated her success. At industry events, she often caught snippets of conversation that made her blood run cold. "It's just positive discrimination," one producer said dismissively. "They're trying to look progressive." "Give it time," another replied. "The novelty will wear off." The pressure to conform grew stronger with each new opportunity. Her new agent, a sleek woman named Mrs. Adebayo, constantly pushed her to diversify her appeal. "Listen, darling," Mrs. Adebayo said during one of their meetings, "you've done well with this natural beauty angle, but it's time to evolve. I have connections with the best skincare specialists in Dubai." Very discreet, very effective. Amara declined, but the suggestions kept coming. Different agents, directors, even fellow actresses would pull her aside at events, sharing their secrets in hushed tones. Each time, she touched Papa Joseph's pendant and remembered who she was. The true test came when International Films, Nigeria's biggest production company, offered her the lead role in their upcoming blockbuster. The contract came with one unspoken condition: she would need to adjust her appearance to match their aesthetic standards. The studio executive, a man with an expensive suit and a practiced smile, laid it out carefully. "We're not asking for anything dramatic. Just a few enhancements. Every actress does it. It's part of evolving in this industry." That evening, Amara sat in her now luxurious apartment, staring at the contract. The salary figure made her head spin. This was the kind of role that could launch an international career. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mrs. Adebayo, urging her to sign. She called Zainab, who had become busy with her own life as a junior doctor but remained her closest confidant. "What does your gut tell you?" Zainab asked after listening to Amara's dilemma. "That I should run far away from this offer," Amara replied, laughing without humor. "But is that just pride talking? Am I being foolish? Remember what you told those girls in your fan club last week? About being true to yourself? That's different. They're young, they need to build their confidence. And you don't?" Zainab's voice was gentle, but firm. "The Amara I know doesn't need to change herself to shine." Later that night, unable to sleep, Amara scrolled through her social media. Her latest post, a picture of her laughing naturally at a charity event, had thousands of comments. Among the usual mix of praise and criticism, one comment caught her eye. "My daughter wants to be an actress, but people tell her she's too dark. You give her hope. Please don't ever change." The words hit her like a physical force. She thought about all the young girls watching her journey, looking to her as she had once looked at the television, searching for someone who proved their dreams were possible. The next morning, she called the studio executive and declined the role. The entertainment blogs exploded with speculation about her decision. Some praised her integrity, others called her foolish. Mrs. Adebayo was furious, threatening to drop her as a client. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. Director Okoro reached out with news that Daughters of the Soil had been picked up by an international streaming service. They wanted to expand the show's scope, reaching audiences across Africa and beyond. "They chose us precisely because we're different," Director Okoro explained. "Because we dare to show our stories, our beauty, our truth without filters." The success that followed was beyond anything Amara had imagined. The show's international release brought a wave of recognition and opportunities that didn't demand she change who she was. Fashion houses from Paris to New York sought her out, celebrating her unique beauty. She began receiving offers for roles that were written specifically with her in mind. Yet with each new level of success, the pressure to conform didn't disappear, it merely changed form. The whispers became more subtle, the suggestions more sophisticated. The entertainment industry, she realized, was like a beautiful maze where every turn offered both opportunity and compromise. As she prepared for an international press tour, Amara stood before her mirror, just as she had so many times before. But now, the reflection showed more than just her appearance. It showed every choice, every stand, every small victory that had brought her to this point. The glittering lights of fame had illuminated her path, but they had also cast new shadows. And as she touched the wooden pendant that still hung around her neck, Amara wondered what price the next level of success would demand, and whether she would be strong enough to stay true to herself when that moment came. The family portrait. The invitation to her cousin Chioma's wedding arrived on a Tuesday morning, gold-embossed and heavy with expectation. Amara sat at her kitchen island, running her fingers over the elaborate lettering while her morning tea grew cold. It would be her first visit home in nearly 8 months. Success, she had discovered, was a demanding companion that left little time for family. The timing coincided with a break in filming the international season of Daughters of the Soil. Amara had been living out of suitcases, traveling between Lagos, London, and New York, her face now appearing on billboards in cities she'd once only dreamed about. But home, that was a different kind of journey altogether. As her driver navigated the familiar roads leading to Ife Gardens, Amara noticed how much had changed. New buildings had sprung up, roads had been paved, and satellite dishes dotted rooftops that once held only corrugated iron. Yet the old mango trees still lined the main street, their branches heavy with fruit, just as she remembered. Her family's compound had undergone its own transformation. A new gate, fresh paint, and her mother's garden now boasted expensive ornamental plants. The changes spoke of prosperity that Amara's success had helped provide. Grace met her at the door, arms wide open. "My superstar," she exclaimed, pulling Amara into an embrace that smelled of familiar spices and maternal pride. "Look how beautiful you've become." The irony of these words wasn't lost on Amara. Her beauty hadn't changed, only her mother's perception of it had. Success, it seemed, had retroactively made her beautiful in her family's eyes. Inside, the house was bustling with wedding preparations. Chioma sat in the living room, surrounded by aunties, discussing last-minute arrangements. Her once dark skin was now a pale shade of caramel, and her natural hair had been replaced with an expensive Brazilian weave. "Amara." Chioma rushed to hug her. "I'm so glad you could come. I was worried you'd be too busy with your international career." The words carried a hint of something: envy? Resentment? That made Amara smile falter slightly. The afternoon unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of old dynamics and new realities. Aunties who had once criticized Amara's complexion now boasted about their connection to her. "We always knew she was special," they said, conveniently forgetting their previous words. Her father, who had opposed her career choice, now proudly showed visitors the framed magazine covers featuring his daughter. "She's carrying our culture to the world," he would say, as if this had always been his dream for her. Even Chitty, now a university student, had changed. He treated her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, as if unsure how to relate to this new version of his sister. "My friends don't believe you're really my sister," he confessed. "They think I'm lying to seem important." The most difficult moment came during the family dinner that evening. As they sat around the table laden with traditional dishes, the conversation turned to Chioma's upcoming wedding. "Her fiancé's family is very particular about appearance," one aunt commented. "It's good that she prepared herself appropriately." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Not everyone needs to change themselves to find happiness," Papa Joseph spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. He sat at the head of the table, older now, but still commanding respect. "Of course not," Grace jumped in, patting Amara's hand. "Our Amara has proven that. But Chioma's chosen a different path, and we support her too." Later that night, Amara found Chioma alone in the garden, away from the wedding chaos. In the moonlight, her cousin's artificially lightened skin seemed to glow with an unnatural pallor. "Are you happy?" Amara asked simply. Chioma was quiet for a long moment. "I'm successful," she finally answered. "I have everything I wanted, a good job, a wealthy fiancé, respect in society." "Isn't that happiness?" "Is it?" "We can't all be revolutionary icons, Amara." Chioma's voice carried an edge of bitterness. "Some of us have to live in the real world, make real compromises." "I live in the real world too," Amara replied gently. "I just refuse to let it change who I am." "And who are you?" Chioma turned to face her. "The great natural beauty? The obsidian queen? You think you're so authentic, but you're just selling a different kind of image." The words stung because they carried a grain of truth. Hadn't Amara's natural beauty become its own kind of brand? Hadn't she benefited from being the right kind of different at the right time? The next morning, as Amara helped with wedding preparations, she observed the women in her family more closely. Her mother, who had never used skin-lightening creams, nevertheless spent hours applying makeup to look presentable. Her younger cousins watched Chioma with admiring eyes, already saving money for their own transformations. The family portrait that was taken that evening captured more than just images. It captured generations of women caught between tradition and modernity, between authenticity and acceptance. Amara stood in the back row, her natural beauty now a statement in itself, while Chioma sat in front, her transformed self a different kind of statement. As the photographer adjusted their positions, Amara caught Papa Joseph's eye. He smiled and touched his own neck, where a pendant identical to hers hung. In that moment, she understood something profound about family, how it could simultaneously be a source of wounds and healing, of constraint and liberation. The wedding was scheduled for tomorrow, and as Amara lay in her childhood bed that night, she reflected on how success had changed not just her life, but the entire dynamic of her family. The walls that had once displayed only Funk's achievements now bore Amara's accolades as well. The conversations that had once dismissed her now centered around her accomplishments. Yet beneath the pride and celebration, old wounds still lurked. Every compliment seemed to carry the weight of past criticism, every celebration a reminder of former rejection. Success hadn't erased the past, it had merely painted over it with a new coat of glamour. As she drifted off to sleep, Amara wondered about the true cost of success, not just to herself, but to everyone around her. The family portrait would hang on their wall, showing smiling faces and careful poses, but the real story lay in what the camera couldn't capture, the complex web of love, expectation, and transformation that bound them all together. Behind the curtain. Fame, Amara discovered, was like living in a house of mirrors. Everywhere she looked, she saw reflections of herself, but none of them felt entirely real. The international success of Daughters of the Soil had catapulted her to a level of stardom that made privacy a distant memory. Her every move was documented, analyzed, and judged by millions. The first cracks began to show during the filming of a crucial scene for the show's international season. The episode explored her character's confrontation with modern beauty standards, a story that paralleled Amara's own journey too closely for comfort. Cut. Director Okoro called for the 5th time. Amara, what's happening? You're not connecting with the material. Amara stood under the harsh studio lights, her throat tight. How could she explain that speaking these lines about staying true to oneself, felt increasingly hollow? That each day brought new compromises, small but significant? Later that evening, alone in her luxury apartment, Amara scrolled through her social media. Her latest post, a behind-the-scenes photo from the set, had millions of likes and thousands of comments. You're such an inspiration. Thank you for staying natural. My daughter wants to be just like you. The weight of these expectations pressed down on her like a physical force. She was no longer just Amara, she had become a symbol, a movement, a cause. Every choice she made carried the hopes and dreams of countless young girls who saw her as their beacon of possibility. The pressure manifested in unexpected ways. She began having trouble sleeping, spending hours staring at her ceiling, replaying every interaction, every decision, every public appearance. Her appetite wavered. The simple joy she had once found in storytelling was now overshadowed by the responsibility of being authentic. Zainab, now busy with her residency at a leading hospital, noticed the changes during one of their rare dinner meetings. When was the last time you actually relaxed? She asked, watching Amara pick at her jollof rice. And I don't mean at a public event or a sponsored retreat, I mean really relaxed. Amara couldn't remember. Her calendar was packed months in advance, filming, appearances, charity events, brand endorsements. Even her free time was carefully orchestrated by her management team to maintain her public image as the natural beauty icon. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had become famous for being authentic, but maintaining that authenticity had become a full-time performance. Every public appearance required her to be naturally perfect, her skin glowing, her smile radiant, her words inspiring. The breaking point came during a live television interview. The host, known for her provocative questions, leaned forward with a predatory smile. There are rumors that your whole natural beauty stance is just clever marketing. That behind the scenes, you use special treatments to maintain your look. How do you respond to that? For a moment, Amara felt the walls of her carefully constructed world trembling. Because while she had never used skin-lightening creams, there were other compromises, the expensive skincare routines, the carefully controlled diet, the hours of exercise with personal trainers, the professional styling team that made her natural look camera-ready. I am authentic to myself, she answered carefully. But being authentic doesn't mean being perfect. The response went viral, spawning countless think pieces about authenticity in the age of social media. But the question had cracked something open inside Amara. That night, she stood before her bathroom mirror, really looking at herself for the first time in months. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, hidden by expertly applied concealer. Her skin, while still naturally dark and beautiful, bore the signs of stress and exhaustion that no camera would ever capture. She thought about Chioma's words at the wedding, "You think you're so authentic, but you're just selling a different kind of image." Was there truth in that? Had she simply traded one form of performance for another? The questions followed her onto the set, into meetings, through public appearances. She began to notice the artifice in everything, how her casual social media posts were carefully curated, how her spontaneous public appearances were meticulously planned, how even her role as a storyteller had become scripted and sanitized. Papa Joseph's pendant, once a source of strength, now felt heavy against her chest. During a rare visit home, she confessed her struggles to him in his garden. "I feel like I'm drowning in expectations," she admitted. "Everyone wants me to be their perfect symbol of natural beauty and authenticity. But what happens when I'm tired? When I'm not feeling beautiful or authentic? When I just want to be human?" Papa Joseph listened quietly, his aged hands gently tending to his roses. "The heaviest burden," he finally said, "is not the one placed on us by others, but the one we place on ourselves trying to meet their expectations." But stepping away from these expectations wasn't simple. Her success had created a web of dependencies, family members who relied on her income, employees whose livelihoods depended on her image, fans who drew strength from her example. The strain began to show in subtle ways. During takes, she would sometimes forget her lines, something that had never happened before. Her hands would shake slightly during public appearances, though the cameras never caught it. She developed a habit of touching up her makeup compulsively, checking her reflection in every surface, haunted by the fear that someone would see through the performance. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of filming, Amara found herself sitting in her car, unable to face the idea of another public appearance. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from her team, reminders about the charity gala she was supposed to attend, questions about tomorrow's schedule, requests for social media content approval. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of success but feeling utterly alone, Amara realized that she was standing at another crossroads. The path that had led her here, the path of authenticity and natural beauty, had somehow become its own kind of prison. The question was, could she find a way to be true to herself while carrying the weight of so many others' dreams? As she finally stepped out of the car, cameras flashing in the distance, Amara painted on her signature smile. But behind it, questions continued to swirl. How long could she maintain this balance? At what point does being a symbol of authenticity become its own form of inauthenticity? And most importantly, what would happen when she could no longer bear the weight of everyone's expectations? The answers to these questions would come sooner than she expected, and in a way that would shake the very foundation of everything she had built. The breaking point. The signs had been there for months, but Amara had ignored them all. The occasional dizziness during long filming days. The persistent headaches that no amount of painkillers seemed to touch. The growing exhaustion that makeup could no longer hide. She attributed it all to stress, to her punishing schedule, to the pressures of maintaining her image. It happened during the filming of the season finale of Daughters of the Soil. The scene required her character to deliver an impassioned speech about heritage and identity, the kind of powerful moment that had become her trademark. The studio lights felt unusually hot that day, beating down on her like the Lagos sun at its peak. "Action!" Director Okoro called. Amara began her lines, but the words seemed to blur together. The room started spinning, the lights growing impossibly bright. She heard concerned voices, felt hands reaching out to steady her, then everything went black. She woke up in a private room at Lagos General Hospital, the steady beep of monitors filling the silence. Zainab was there, not as a friend but as a doctor, reviewing her charts with a worried frown. "Why didn't you tell anyone you were having these symptoms?" Zainab asked, her professional demeanor cracking with concern. "What symptoms?" Amara tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, uncooperative. "Headaches, dizziness, fatigue, irregular heartbeat." Zainab listed them off. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and your kidney function tests." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're not good, Amara." The diagnosis came like a slap: severe exhaustion complicated by chronic stress and early signs of kidney dysfunction. The doctors suggested it could be linked to her punishing schedule, poor sleep patterns, and the cocktail of herbal supplements and energy drinks she'd been taking to keep up with her demands. "You need complete rest," the lead doctor advised. "No filming, no appearances, no social media. Your body is sending you a warning, and if you don't listen." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Amara had seen the statistics, read the stories about young stars burning out, their bodies giving up under the strain of constant performance. She'd just never thought it could happen to her. The news of her collapse spread like wildfire. Within hours, #PrayForAmara was trending on social media. Her phone exploded with messages, from family, friends, colleagues, fans. Everyone wanted to know if she was okay, when she'd be back, what this meant for the show. Director Okoro visited her in the hospital, bringing with her a reality check that Amara hadn't wanted to face. "We've been pushing too hard," the director admitted, sitting beside Amara's bed. "The international attention, the expanded season, the constant public appearances. We got caught up in the success and forgot that you're human." The words echoed what Papa Joseph had tried to tell her months ago. But it had been easier to ignore the warning signs, to keep pushing, to maintain the perfect image that everyone expected. Her mother arrived the next day, bringing with her the familiar sense of home and a mother's unfiltered truth. "Look at you," Grace said, taking in Amara's appearance without the usual makeup and careful styling. "You look just like my grandmother in her final days, when the burden of being the village storyteller became too much for her." It was the first time her mother had ever compared her to her great-grandmother without a tone of disappointment. The observation carried a weight of history, of patterns repeating across generations. Papa Joseph came too, moving slowly with his walking stick but bringing an energy that seemed to clear the artificial hospital air. He sat quietly by her bed, holding her hand, his presence saying more than words could. "The strongest trees," he finally said, "know when to bend with the wind." As Amara lay in that hospital bed, forced into stillness for the first time in years, the carefully constructed walls of her life began to crumble. She thought about the irony of her situation, how in trying to be a symbol of natural beauty and authenticity, she had pushed her natural self to the breaking point. The doctors kept her under observation for a week, running tests and monitoring her recovery. During this time, without the masks of makeup or the armor of carefully chosen outfits, without the constant performance of being Amara the icon, she began to see herself clearly for the first time in years. Her management team was in crisis mode, trying to control the narrative. They wanted to spin her collapse as mere exhaustion, a brief pause in an otherwise triumphant journey. Mrs. Adebayo suggested they release carefully staged recovery photos showing Amara looking strong and resilient. But something had shifted inside her. As she watched the sunset through her hospital window, Papa Joseph's pendant cool against her skin, Amara realized she had reached a crossroads even more significant than the one that had led her to that first audition. The path she had chosen, to be a symbol of natural beauty and authenticity, had somehow led her away from her own truth. In trying to prove that dark skin was beautiful, that natural was enough, she had subjected herself to an equally demanding set of expectations and standards. The real breaking point wasn't her physical collapse, it was the shattering of the illusion she had helped create. The question now was, could she find a way to be both symbol and human? Could she tell a story that included not just triumph, but also vulnerability, not just strength, but also weakness? As she drafted a message to her millions of followers, her hands trembled slightly. This would not be like her usual polished posts. This would be raw, real, perhaps even revolutionary in its honesty. My journey has hit a wall, she wrote, and I need to be honest, not just with you, but with myself. The path to true beauty isn't about being perfect. Sometimes it's about admitting when we're not okay. The cursor blinked on her phone screen, waiting for her to continue. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the evidence of her body's rebellion against the perfect image she had tried to maintain, Amara faced her hardest challenge yet, telling the truth about the price of being everyone's symbol of natural beauty. What she didn't know was that this moment of crisis would lead to her most powerful story yet, one that would challenge not just beauty standards, but the very nature of authenticity in a world obsessed with perfection. Truth and reflection. Recovery, Amara learned, was a journey measured not in days, but in revelations. After her release from the hospital, she retreated to Papa Joseph's compound, away from the cameras and expectations that had nearly broken her. The old house, with its quiet gardens and unhurried rhythms, became her sanctuary. Her raw, honest social media post about her collapse had sparked an unexpected wave of response. Celebrities and fans alike shared their own stories of burnout, of the pressure to maintain impossible standards, of the exhaustion that came from constant performance. What had begun as a personal crisis had opened a deeper conversation about authenticity in an age of carefully curated images. The first week at Papa Joseph's house, Amara did something she hadn't done in years. She stopped looking in mirrors. She let her skin breathe without makeup, wore comfortable traditional clothes instead of fashion-forward outfits, and allowed herself to simply be. "You look like yourself again," Papa Joseph observed one morning as they sat in his garden. "Not the version you show the world, but the one I remember from before." The garden became her thinking place. As Papa Joseph tended his plants, Amara helped him, learning the patience required to nurture growth. Her hands, once maintained perfectly for close-up shots, became marked with soil. She found something profound in this connection to the earth, a reminder of what natural truly meant. One afternoon, while helping to transplant some seedlings, she found an old mirror buried in the garden soil. It was small and tarnished, barely reflective, but it sparked a memory. "That belonged to your great-grandmother," Papa Joseph said, noticing her discovery. She used it not to check her appearance, but to practice her storytelling. She said sometimes you need to see yourself to tell the truth. The concept struck Amara deeply. How long had she been looking at herself without really seeing? How many stories had she told while hiding from her own truth? During her third week of recovery, Zainab visited, bringing medical updates and friendship without judgment. They sat on the veranda, drinking hibiscus tea and watching the sunset. "Your test results are improving," Zainab reported. "But the real question is, are you?" Amara considered the question carefully. "I'm learning," she finally said, "that being a symbol of natural beauty doesn't mean being naturally perfect. It means being naturally human." Her words found their way into her journal, which had become her constant companion during recovery. Unlike her carefully crafted social media posts, these pages held her unfiltered thoughts, her fears, her discoveries. She wrote about the pressure of representation, the exhaustion of constant performance, the paradox of becoming a symbol of authenticity while losing touch with her own truth. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One morning, while helping Papa Joseph prune his roses, she pricked her finger on a thorn. A drop of blood welled up, stark against her dark skin. The sight triggered a memory of all the times she had pushed through pain, physical and emotional, to maintain her image. "Sometimes," Papa Joseph said, watching her examine the small wound, "we need to bleed to remember we're alive." That evening, Amara stood before a mirror for the first time in weeks. The woman who looked back at her was different from the icon she had been. Her skin, though still beautiful, showed signs of stress and recovery. Her eyes held shadows of exhaustion, but also gleams of newfound wisdom. She was, she realized, both less and more than the image she had projected to the world. Taking out her phone, Amara began to record a video, not a polished production, but a raw, unfiltered moment of truth. "This is me," she began, her voice steady. "Not the me you see on magazine covers or television screens, but the real me. I've spent years being a symbol of natural beauty, but I lost sight of what natural truly means. It doesn't mean perfect. It means real, with all the flaws and struggles that come with being human. She spoke about her collapse, about the pressure of being everyone's role model, about the exhaustion of maintaining an impossible standard. But she also spoke about healing, about rediscovering herself beyond the image, about finding strength in vulnerability. True beauty isn't about never falling, she said, touching Papa Joseph's pendant. It's about how we rise, how we heal, how we learn to love ourselves, not just our perfect moments, but our struggles too. The video was different from anything she had ever shared. There was no perfect lighting, no carefully chosen background, no rehearsed speech. Just Amara, speaking her truth in the fading evening light of Papa Joseph's garden. Her management team was against posting it. Mrs. Adebayo called it career suicide. But Amara had stopped letting fear guide her decisions. She posted the video with a simple caption, "My truth, unfiltered." The response was overwhelming. The video went viral, not just in Nigeria, but globally. Messages poured in from people sharing their own struggles with identity, beauty standards, and the pressure to be perfect. Major news outlets picked up the story, but not for its scandal, for its honesty. Director Okoro visited a few days later, not to discuss the show's schedule, but to share her own story of struggle and resilience. They sat in Papa Joseph's garden, two women speaking not as director and star, but as human beings learning to be real in an artificial world. What if, Director Okoro suggested, we changed the story? Not just your character's arc, but the whole narrative about beauty and authenticity? The idea took root in Amara's mind, growing like the seedlings she had helped plant. Perhaps her greatest role wasn't being a symbol of perfection, but a testament to the beauty of being real. As she continued her recovery, Amara began to write, not scripts or social media posts, but her own story, unvarnished and true. She wrote about the price of dawn, about the cost of trying to be everyone's light while losing her own way in the darkness. The woman who emerged from this period of reflection was neither the naive girl who had first auditioned for Daughters of the Soil, nor the polished icon she had become. She was something else entirely, someone who understood that true beauty lies not in perfection, but in the courage to be authentically imperfect. Papa Joseph, watching her transformation, smiled knowingly. Now, he said, you're not just telling stories. You're living them. New Dawn. 3 months after her collapse, Amara stood in front of the Golden Horizons Entertainment Building, the same place where her journey had begun. This time, she wasn't there to audition, but to propose a revolution. The conference room buzzed with tension as she faced the network executives. Her appearance had changed. She wore a simple Ankara dress, her face bare except for shea butter, her hair in its natural coils. But the biggest change was in her presence. Gone was the carefully constructed persona of the perfect role model. In its place stood a woman who had made peace with her complexity. We need to tell different stories, she began, her voice steady. Not just about beauty, but about truth. About the cost of our silence, the price of our perfection, and the power of being real. She laid out her vision for transforming Daughters of the Soil. Instead of just celebrating natural beauty, the show would explore the genuine struggles, pressures, and triumphs of women fighting to be authentic in a world that demanded perfection. Her character's story would mirror her own journey, not as a fall from grace, but as an evolution towards truth. But this isn't just about the show, she continued. It's about creating a movement. A space where we can all be honestly, messily, beautifully human. Director Okoro, sitting beside her, nodded in support. Together, they had spent weeks crafting this new direction, drawing from their own experiences and the thousands of messages they'd received from viewers sharing similar struggles. The executives were skeptical at first. This isn't what audiences expect from you, one argued. They want inspiration, not complications. Real inspiration, Amara countered, comes from seeing ourselves in each other's struggles, not in impossible ideals. She shared some of the responses to her viral video, stories of women who had been afraid to show their natural skin, of girls who starved themselves to maintain a certain image, of actresses who had burned out trying to be perfect. But she also shared stories of healing, of communities coming together, of people finding strength in their authenticity. To everyone's surprise, it was Mrs. Adebayo who spoke up in support. "Times are changing," she said. "People are tired of perfection. They're hungry for truth." The new season of Daughters of the Soil began production with a transformed vision. Amara's character faced her own breakdown on screen, mirroring reality but with a purpose beyond drama. The show tackled topics that had been taboo: mental health in the entertainment industry, the pressure of representation, the complex relationship between tradition and modern beauty standards. But Amara's transformation extended beyond the screen. She launched the Dawn Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting mental health awareness in the entertainment industry and supporting young people struggling with identity and self-acceptance. The Foundation's first project was a series of workshops in schools, where Amara shared her story not as a cautionary tale, but as a journey of discovery. She sat with young girls who felt the same pressures she had faced, listening to their stories, sharing their tears and their hopes. During one such workshop, a young girl asked her, "But don't you miss being perfect?" Amara smiled, touching Papa Joseph's pendant. "I was never perfect. None of us are. And that's what makes us beautiful." Her new approach attracted different kinds of opportunities. International organizations sought her out not just as a face for their campaigns, but as a voice for change. She began giving speeches at universities, writing articles about authentic representation, and collaborating with researchers studying the impact of beauty standards on mental health. The fashion and beauty industries, which had once tried to mold her into their standard of perfection, now approached her with different proposals. She worked only with brands willing to show real skin, real bodies, real stories. Her contracts now included clauses about minimal photo editing and authentic representation. Her relationship with social media transformed as well. Instead of carefully curated posts showing only her best moments, she shared the reality of her days, the tiredness after long shoots, the struggles with self-doubt, the joy of small victories. Her followers responded with their own honest stories, creating a community of support and genuine connection. 1 year after her collapse, Amara stood on a different kind of stage, a TED Talk platform. Her topic was "The Price of Dawn, Finding Light in Our Truth." As she spoke to the audience about her journey from performance to authenticity, she noticed something had changed in how people looked at her. They weren't seeing an icon or a symbol, they were seeing a human being sharing her truth. "Dawn comes," she told them, "not when we chase the light, but when we learn to embrace our shadows. True beauty isn't in perfection, it's in the courage to be real, to be vulnerable, to be ourselves in a world that often asks us to be something else." The speech went viral, but this time, Amara didn't measure its success in views or likes. She measured it in the messages she received from people who felt seen, understood, validated in their own struggles. Back home, in Papa Joseph's garden, she helped plant a new row of roses. Some were perfect in their symmetry, others grew wild and untamed. All of them were beautiful in their own way. "You see," Papa Joseph said, watching her work, "sometimes we have to let things grow as they will." Amara looked at her hands, dark and strong against the earth, no longer maintained for cameras, but marked with the honest work of living. She thought about the young girl she had been, desperate to change herself to fit the world's standards. That girl had needed to go through her journey to arrive here, at this new dawn, where beauty meant something far deeper than appearance. She was no longer just the obsidian queen or the natural beauty icon. She had become something more profound, a storyteller of truth, a bearer of light who wasn't afraid of shadows, a woman who had learned that the most beautiful dawn comes after the darkest night. Ripples of change. Change, like ripples in a pond, moves outward in ever-widening circles. 2 years after Amara's transformation, the effects of her journey began to manifest in unexpected ways throughout Nigerian society and beyond. It started with her cousin Chioma's daughter. The little girl was born with skin as dark as Amara's, and unlike the previous generation, Chioma celebrated this fact. At the naming ceremony, she proudly announced that her daughter would be called Amara. Because she should grow up knowing her beauty is natural and enough, Chioma declared, her own artificially lightened skin a testament to the changes between generations. The ripples spread through the entertainment industry first. Young actresses who had once felt pressured to modify their appearance began speaking out about their experiences. Several prominent Nigerian production companies, following Golden Horizon's lead, adopted new guidelines about authentic representation and mental health support for their talent. Daughters of the Soil had evolved into something unprecedented. The show's honest portrayal of women's struggles with identity and self-acceptance sparked a cultural conversation that transcended entertainment. Universities began using episodes in their gender studies and media analysis courses. International critics praised its revolutionary approach to storytelling and representation. But the most profound changes happened at the community level. The Dawn Foundation, under Amara's guidance, had established mentorship programs in schools across Nigeria. Young girls learned not just about beauty in all its forms, but about mental health, self-worth, and the importance of authentic self-expression. During one foundation event at her old secondary school, Amara encountered a familiar face, her former dance instructor, the one who had once relegated her to the back row. "I was wrong," the instructor admitted, tears in her eyes. "I perpetuated the same prejudices that had been forced on me. Now, I teach my students that every shade of beauty deserves the spotlight." The cosmetics industry, sensing the shifting winds, began to change too. Companies that had once promoted skin-lightening products started approaching Amara with different proposals, lines celebrating natural skin care, campaigns featuring unedited images of diverse beauty. Some even withdrew their lightening products from the market, citing ethical concerns. One major brand transformed its entire marketing strategy after their CEO attended one of Amara's workshops. Their new campaign, Beauty Beyond Light, featured women of all complexions, telling their stories of self-acceptance. Sales soared, proving that authenticity could be both ethically and commercially successful. The impact reached beyond Nigeria's borders. Amara received invitations to speak at international forums about beauty standards and mental health. Her TED Talk had sparked similar movements in other African countries, where women began challenging their own society's beauty prejudices. But perhaps the most meaningful change happened within families. Parents who attended Dawn Foundation workshops began approaching beauty and self-worth differently with their children. The foundation's research showed a significant decrease in skin-lightening product usage among teenagers in communities where their programs were active. Grace, Amara's mother, became an unexpected ally in this transformation. She began hosting monthly meetings in their compound where women gathered to discuss beauty, tradition, and change. The conversations often turned emotional as mothers shared their hopes of breaking the cycle of prejudice for their daughters. "I wish I had known better when you were young," Grace told Amara during one such gathering. "But I'm learning now, and that's what matters." Even the local markets reflected the change. Vendors who had once prominently displayed skin-lightening products now promoted natural skincare alternatives. Some admitted that Amara's story had made them question their role in perpetuating harmful beauty standards. The wedding industry, a powerful influence on beauty standards, began showcasing more diverse representations of Nigerian beauty. Bridal magazines that had once exclusively featured light-skinned models now celebrated brides of all complexions. Amara's own bridal shoot for a major magazine, wearing traditional attire and minimal makeup, set a new standard for wedding photography. Papa Joseph's garden became a symbol of this transformation. What had started as his private sanctuary grew into a community space where the Dawn Foundation hosted healing circles and storytelling sessions. Women and girls would gather among the roses, sharing their stories of struggle and triumph. "Every flower in this garden grows in its own time, in its own way," Papa Joseph would tell them. "Just like every person's journey to self-acceptance follows its own path." The international media took notice. A prestigious documentary filmmaker approached Amara to tell the story of this cultural shift. The resulting film, The Dawn Effect, chronicled not just Amara's personal journey but the collective awakening she had inspired. During the film's premiere in Lagos, Amara watched from the audience as women from all walks of life shared how the movement had touched their lives. There was the young actress who had rejected pressure to lighten her skin, the teenage girl who had started a self-acceptance club at her school, the grandmother who had finally made peace with her own beauty. But it was the quiet changes that moved her most deeply. Like the letter she received from a small village in northern Nigeria, where a group of girls had started their own garden, inspired by Papa Joseph's. They wrote about how they gathered there to tell their stories, to support each other, to grow together in self-acceptance. The ripples continued to spread, touching lives in ways Amara could never have imagined when she first chose to tell her truth. She had learned that real change doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, like dawn breaking over the horizon, gradually illuminating what was always there, but hidden in darkness. As she stood in Papa Joseph's garden one evening, watching a new generation of girls tend to the roses, Amara understood that her story had become something larger than herself. It had become a seed of change, planted in the fertile soil of hope, growing into a future where every shade of beauty could bloom freely under the dawn's early light. Full circle. 5 years had passed since Amara's collapse, and the world had changed in ways she could never have imagined. On a warm evening in Lagos, she stood backstage at the inaugural Dawn Festival, an international celebration of authentic beauty and storytelling that had grown from the seeds of her journey. The festival grounds were alive with energy. Women and girls from across Africa and beyond had gathered to share their stories, their art, and their truth. Exhibition spaces showcased unretouched photographs of people in their natural beauty. Stages hosted performances that challenged traditional beauty narratives. Workshops offered spaces for healing and transformation. As Amara prepared to give the opening address, she touched the wooden pendant at her neck, not the one Papa Joseph had given her, but a new one. The original now belonged to young Amara, Chioma's daughter, who wore it proudly at age 5. This new pendant had been carved from a branch of one of Papa Joseph's rose bushes after he passed away the previous year. His final months had been peaceful, spent in his beloved garden, surrounded by the community he had helped nurture. Before he died, he had shared one last story with Amara, the full tale of her great-grandmother, the griot whose strength she had inherited. She too faced a choice, he had told her, his voice weak but his eyes bright. To be silent and accepted, or to speak and transform. She chose to speak, just as you did. That's why her story lives on. Now, as Amara stepped onto the festival stage, she carried both their legacies with her. The audience before her represented every shade of human beauty, dark skin, light skin, and everything in between. But more importantly, they represented every shade of human truth. 5 years ago, she began, I thought my story was about the price we pay for beauty. But I've learned it's really about the beauty we find when we stop paying that price. When we choose truth over perfection, authenticity over acceptance, and love over fear. As she spoke, she saw familiar faces in the crowd. Zainab, now a leading researcher in mental health and social pressure, sat with her young daughter. Director Okoro, whose work had expanded beyond entertainment to social impact, nodded encouragingly. Even Mrs. Adebayo, who had undergone her own transformation, watched with pride. Her mother Grace was there too, leading a workshop on intergenerational healing. She had become a powerful advocate for change in their community, helping other mothers navigate the challenges of raising confident daughters in a changing world. Our journey isn't over, Amara continued. Every day, somewhere, a girl looks in the mirror and questions her worth. Every day, someone feels pressured to change who they are to fit someone else's standard of beauty. But every day is also an opportunity for dawn, for light to break through darkness, for truth to overcome fear, for natural beauty to bloom in all its form. The festival represented everything Amara had dreamed of but could never have achieved alone. The Dawn Foundation had grown into a global movement, with chapters in countries across Africa and beyond. Daughters of the Soil had spawned an entire genre of authentic storytelling in African media. The beauty industry was transforming, led by companies that prioritized health and self-acceptance over impossible standards. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the one that couldn't be measured, the shift in how people saw themselves and each other. In schools, markets, homes, and communities, the conversation about beauty had evolved. Young girls no longer automatically assumed they needed to be lighter to be lovely. Women who had spent years hiding their natural selves were stepping into the light. After her speech, Amara walked through the festival grounds, stopping to talk with attendees, listen to their stories, and share in their journeys. She visited the memorial garden, modeled after Papa Joseph's, where people wrote their stories of transformation and hung them on the branches of trees. In a quiet corner of the garden, she found young Amara sitting under a rose bush, telling stories to a group of captivated children. The sight brought tears to her eyes, the legacy continuing, the story flowing into the future. That evening, as the sun set over the festival, Amara gathered with her closest friends and family for a private ceremony. They planted a new rose bush in the memorial garden, its deep purple blooms a color Papa Joseph had spent years cultivating. This variety is called Dawn's Truth, she explained to the gathering. Because truth, like dawn, comes in infinite shades of beautiful. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit throughout the festival grounds, their warm light reflecting off faces filled with joy, hope, and acceptance. Amara looked up at the stars, remembering how Papa Joseph had once told her that her skin was like the midnight sky holding all the universe's light. She understood now that he had been only partly right. Her skin, her story, her truth, they were not just the night sky. They were also the dawn that breaks through darkness, revealing the beauty that was always there, waiting to be seen, waiting to be told, waiting to bloom. The story of the price of dawn had become a story of the gift of dawn, the gift of being truly, beautifully, authentically oneself. And like all true stories, it had no real ending, only new beginnings, as each person who heard it found the courage to embrace their own dawn. As the festival continued around her, Amara took out her journal, the same one she had started during her recovery, and began to write. Not about the end of her journey, but about all the journeys yet to begin, all the stories yet to be told, all the beauty yet to bloom in the infinite shades of dawn. The price of dawn, she wrote, is not in changing who we are, but in becoming who we were always meant to be. And that is a price worth paying, for it buys us nothing less than our own truth, our own light, our own beautiful way of being in the world. And somewhere, in that moment, another story was beginning, another truth was waiting to be told, another dawn was breaking over the horizon of possibility. The end.